And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. I love our corporate-controlled mainstream media, leading off with most Democrats want someone other than Biden to run. You go, no. This is where you got to stop this. And Democrats, if that's true, stop it. Stop it. The majority of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents want the party to replace Joe Biden in 2024. I don't care if you replace him or not. Just keep the policies. Keep the direction we're going. Stop with the nonsense. Stop with this. Stop it. And I'll tell you, the approval ratings highest it's been, highest point this year, which means people are, I think, coming around to the reality, moving in the right direction. Today, the president was talking about, hey, how are we going to help middle-class folks? And the important line for me anyway, I know everyone was on the, capitalism without competition isn't capitalism, it's exploitation, that line. Good line, true, good line. But the most important line in there is, my focus is on working class and middle class folks. They're the ones who get hurt the most. There is a guy sitting in the White House who gives a rat's behind about Joe Sixpack, who cares about the ham and eggers, the people who show up, punch the clock, do the work, that nobody remembers their name. There's a guy sitting in the White House who cares about those people, even if they don't care about him. This is the monumental moment where we got to wake up, because we're at a very important moment in history. Very important moment. This is a crossroads moment. Because what Biden is doing is moving us off what has been built over the last 40 years. The whole supply side voodoo Reaganomics, all the neoliberalism, moving it now slowly, but moving us away from that and moving us back in a direction that helped build the most prosperous working class in history, helping to reshore manufacturing, helping to invest in the future of this country, and helping working people to share in it. I've been having tons of conversations with people here over the last several days as we plan for our Working Class Heroes Tour. And I keep coming back to this conversation with people about, the golden age of the working class for America, the golden age of of America. What people think back to as, when the country was great. And they always come back to that post-World War II era, my grandparents' generation. That greatest generation that fought the war, came home and fought the boss, and built the most prosperous working class in history, in the history of civilization, not just our country, in the history of civilization, where workers had a fair shot, shared in the wealth that their labor created. And how did they do it? Well, they did it through extraordinarily strong unions, which meant working people were standing together, not eating each other. And they did it through voting for people who invested in them and their communities. The reason the 50s and 60s were so great, if you will, is because we had incredible investment from government, smart investment. Roads and bridges and healthcare and education and things to make us better. And how do we pay for it? Well, we paid for it by taxing the hell out of rich people. And when I tell folks, you go, well, we're taxed enough already now. No, we're not. Or at least our rich people aren't. But you go back to that era where we think of it as the great era, the Leave It to Beaver, Mayberry kind of Norman Rockwell era. Tax rates on the very wealthy were through the roof. And we need to go back to that. We need to return to that era. In fact, the top marginal tax rate in 1953 was 92%. Corporate tax rates were 56%. We use that money to invest in the future. It was a three-legged stool. High taxes on the very wealthy, redistributed into investments in our future, in our country, in our infrastructure and education and healthcare, and strong unions to demand a share of the profits that their labor created. And over these last 40, 50 years, those three legs, well, they've been whittled down to, well, to barely pencils. And the sad reality is we've been sold this false bill of goods for so long that, we could all be, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and we're all going to be self-made millionaires, when the reality is most working people are just getting the short end of the stick. So when Biden says capitalism without competition isn't capitalism, it's exploitation, he's right. It is. And thank goodness there's someone in the White House who gives a tinker's damn about the average working person. Now, the event today, talking about, hey, how are we going to crack down on all of the fees and all of the... How are we going to crack down on how the economy has Mitt Romneyed us to death? Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, ran around for a long time saying, I never raised taxes, but raised fees on working people more than 500 times. So every time you went to get a driver's license, a fishing license, a hunting license, a license for this, for that, whatever, you got taxed. You did, the working people. People like him, they walked away scot-free. So what Biden is doing is saying, look, all these nickel and dime fees you get at with airlines or banks or any of this stuff, it's time there's some transparency. It's time we start bringing this stuff out into the light. And what they pointed out is, and this is just a mind-blowing number, just baggage fees alone last year, just you needing to get your luggage from one place to the other, the airline industry made $5.3 billion. Just that. They made $700 million in cancellation and changes. $700 million bucks. Because it's amazing. It's amazing how in the real small print, way down at the bottom, and in print that you need a magnifying glass to read, they put all the details. Now, of course, the lobby group for the airline industry says, well, we're doing the transparency. It's the taxes. Because again, you got to get people foaming at the mouth over taxes. Because taxes, that's the problem. Again, distraction. Now the Biden event today, again, talking about how are we going to help working class people. Did we have that in the last administration? Yeah, we had a lot of talk, not much in the way of action. And this is why I'm thrilled to have Biden in the White House right now. And I've said it a bunch of times. Wasn't my first choice. Was not. But doing the work. In fact, he's also come out and said that they're moving towards having the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, requiring internet service providers. Have you looked at your internet bill? Lots of charges. You go, what's that? Well, it's time we bring that stuff out into the light. Also, there's going to be some money to help, some grants to help small meat processors to enter into producing our nation's meat supply. And you go, there are 4 companies that control like 90%. And this is where, again, competition matters. And this is where conservatives, my conservative friends, remember when you used to believe in competition? Remember that? Come back with me in the way back machine. Come on. You used to believe in that. You used to preach about competition. How we needed that in the economy, and it was good for us. Only now you're kind of the monopolistic folks. Because you're on the team. You bought the hat, you got the shirt. Maybe we start thinking a little bit differently, especially those of us in the working class. When you start looking at the numbers, I think kind of important. I was looking at some Federal Reserve numbers because I want to talk a little bit about the Federal Reserve. And we're at an interesting point because we've got a Federal Reserve that wants to slam on the brakes because rich people, they're afraid of you and me. They're afraid of working class people having a little bit of security, a little bit of wealth. And I came across this graph that they had in the One Fed report that shows that the bottom 50% of us, real net household wealth, is at an all-time record high. Bottom 50% of us average about $67,000 in wealth. that is, well above the $8,000 it was back in 2011. And has skyrocketed during the Biden years. In fact, has gone up 60% since the beginning of Biden's term, which means that the policies that they're moving on, the things that they're doing to help working class people is what? It's working. It's working. Which is why last week we were talking about, the Fed, Jerome Powell, basically slamming on the brakes, and what we know is coming is a massive recession. And they're honest about this. He did an interview not too long ago, and one of the people asked the question, how long is it going to take? How much economic pain should we prepare for? And the chairman said, how long? Well, he says, it really depends on how long it takes for wages, and more than that, prices to come down, for inflation to come down. He's basically saying, well, we've got to depress your wages. We've got to make you work for less, which means we've got to crush those unions, which means we've got to crush worker power, and we've got to make people desperate again. This is what he's saying. This other guy, Michael McKay, asks if 1.3 million jobs being lost, if that's acceptable. And Powell's response is, we're never going to say that it's too many people working, but the real point is that inflation. What we hear from people when we meet them is that they're really suffering from inflation. And if we want to set ourselves up really like the other period of a very strong labor market, we have got to get inflation behind us. He says, I wish there were a painless way to do that. There isn't. So what we need to do, get rates up to the point where we're putting meaningful downward pressure on inflation. And that's what we're doing. And what is inflation? That's you. That's wages. Meaningful pressure downward on your wages. And this is where you go, corporate profits are really high. We've got a wealth class that's doing really well. How come we don't hear the Fed asking them to help? And I go back to what Biden said at the beginning. I go back to that in the minute. His focus is on working class people, on the middle class, on the people who get up every day and punch a clock and go to work and support their families, because they're the ones who get hurt the most. That is a refreshing departure from the reality of virtually every working day of my life. As we have been under this neoliberal kind of push of using the Fed to cause inflation when working people do a little bit better. You look at the reality. The reality is policies are working, making lives better. Wealth class can't have that. They want people desperate, pliable, working, happy to have jobs, just happy to have those crummy jobs. Powerless. Question is that what you want? And in this election is about, do we continue on a course that's moving us in a positive direction? Or, do we give in and go back to the neoliberal supply side voodoo Reaganomic, give the rich people everything they want in the hope that their pockets full and we get to scurry and fight over the crumbs? That's the question. So we can play the red hat, blue hat game, we can fight over who's wearing which T-shirt, or we can look upward and go, yeah, it's those corporate boardrooms. That's where we should be putting our effort. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So something really kind of cool happened today. I mean, look, I'm not a big science nerd, but I kind of was, science fiction stuff growing up as a kid, space stuff, Ray Bradbury, Omni magazine, kind of cool potential of where we go. Today, the DART mission. They basically shot what was, I don't know, like a vending machine into space, and they hit this asteroid, which evidently is about the size of like a football field, I guess, traveling at 4 miles a second, thousands of miles away. They literally hurled a vending machine at this thing. I mean, the math in this is just incredible. The technology just incredible. My first thought was, I wonder how many charter school graduates were on that team. How many for-profit, paper mill college graduates were on that team that were able to pull this off. And then my second thought was, wow, we could hit an asteroid moving at like 4 miles a second. Thousands of miles above the Earth. We could hurl a vending machine at it and hit it dead smack in the middle. But we can't solve the problems that we have in front of us that should be very, very simple. We can't end childhood hunger. We can't give veterans a place to live. We can't solve those things. We can't create good jobs for working people. We can't rebuild our infrastructure, but we can do that. We have the intelligence, the ability to cooperate, just incredible. And look, the reality is, because the system is set up to keep us pitted against each other. And I saw the headlines today that there's a headline over at the New York Times. Republicans intensify attacks on crime. As Democrats push back. And again, we're fighting over like right on cue, because Republicans don't really have any solutions to our real problems. So we got to point out things. Immigration and crime. It's election time. Trot out the tried and tested, true fear-mongering tactics. And like I said, right on cue. So am I surprised? No. And ultimately, who gets rich off of this? Well, Comcast, the big money media companies. In fact, the other story that I came across, in this election cycle, campaigns have spent more than $6.4 billion on ads, TV, radio, digital. Do you think we could spend that money just, I don't know, a little bit better, a little bit smarter, help us move in a direction that, I don't know, we're actually investing in the future, helping create the jobs that we need, just kind of throwing that out there as a thought. Just kind of a thought. Let's quick go to the phones. We got Alice on one. Alice, how are we doing today?
Oh, we're doing okay. The Republicans really don't want to solve anything. They just want to be the morality police. It's much more fun that way, telling people how to live and what to do, and blaming everything on the Democrats.
Well, that's the game, because when you don't have a plan, you've got to point out the deficiencies in others.
Exactly. Like I said, they're more concerned with oppressing us and making us all adopt their so-called superior morals. I actually find fault with the idea that they have superior morals, because I really think that Charles Manson and his family had better morals than the Republicans and the evangelicals and the morality police.
Ouch.
That's
a statement.
I'm totally serious. So, yeah, we're not going to solve anything as long as we have them pushing their, oh no, we can't do this and that.
No, and this is where I think we're in a moment, and this election I think is really important, because I do see some good things coming out of this administration, and I do see this president as someone who cares about average, everyday working people, like no president in my lifetime. And look, people can say what they want about Obama or Clinton or Carter, and these were not people who, in my view, who viewed working class people through the same lens that Biden does, especially on the policy front. So this is why I think, in this moment, I think Biden's doing a great job.
I agree with you, and I agree with you in the fact that he seems to be more concerned about the working class people than, like you, and I'm a few years older than you, he is more concerned more so than anyone that I've seen. But I guess we can just look forward to the morality police showing up. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate it. No, but this is basically my main premise of the trip that we're about ready to embark upon. Going into places that we don't know what we're going to find, but talking about where do we want to get? Because I've said this before. I believe, and I've always believed, that working people want to get to the same place. And politically, we've always taken different paths and had different ideas. I've always believed that until recently. I've always believed that Republicans and Democrats all wanted the same destination. We wanted good schools and good safe neighborhoods and good jobs. And it was just a matter of how to get there. What path do you take to get there? I'm now increasingly not seeing and believing that to be the reality. I'm seeing people like the guy running for governor in my state who's talking about a complete transformation of everything that I believe that our state and our country should be. A total fundamental shift of virtually every aspect of our lives, and not wanting to get to the same kind of place. Fundamentally changing who and what we are as a country. And this is why I think this election is so important. And I think this administration is doing something that I think is worth noting. And it's undoing a lot of the powerful forces that, to be honest, have gotten just obscenely wealthy over the last 40 years. The ones who put Reagan into power, the ones who were able to just cash in off of broken unions and horrible policy. Now's the time for us to hold on to that. Now's the time for us to push back. Now's the time to stand up and move in a better direction. At least that's my thought. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, some good news. New York Times had a story today that we're creating manufacturing jobs like it's the 70s. And, that's a good thing. Back after this.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day that became known as Bloody Thursday. 7 striking workers were shot dead and another 30 wounded at the Chicola Mill in Honapath, South Carolina. The Great Textile Strike of 1934 had started on September 1st. The 22-day strike spanned the eastern United States from New England to Georgia and involved close to 500,000 workers. The main issue was the dreaded stretch-out, increased workloads at the same or even reduced pay rates. Striking textile workers implemented the flying picket squad tactic employed by Minneapolis Teamsters earlier that summer. Hundreds drove from mill to prevent scabbing. Mill executives across the Piedmont were stunned and terrified at the strike's effectiveness and the workers' militancy. Strikers at the Chicola Mill had formed solid picket lines at the gate when scabs and special deputies armed by the mill owners opened fire. All 7 were shot in the back as they tried to escape the hail of bullets. According to a New York Times article the following day, the killings marked, quote, the beginning of the second bloody phase of the strike as one town after another reported completion of preparations to resist the flying squads and the picketing activity of the strikers. Frank Beecham, the grandson of Chicola mill owner and mayor of Hona Path, Dan Beecham, has worked to unearth the history of the massacre and apologize for his grandfather's cruelty. He notes that, as in many southern mill towns, after the strike went down to defeat, those who struck were fired and blacklisted. Those who retained their jobs essentially took a vow of silence, never to discuss the strike or the massacre again.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Let me say one word to you, nuts. Now, let me say one name to you, Ted Cruz. They've become synonymous with the Texas lawmaker perennially topping national lists of goofy right-wing political goobers. Only, Ted can't rightly be called a lawmaker, for he's not a serious participant in that process, instead devoting his senatorship to political stunts and picking silly PR fights with a growing list of enemies. Running out of people to attack, Ted has found another for his vitriol, fictional icons. He's been padding his right-wing credentials by going after Mr. Potato Head, Mickey, and Pluto, and, believe it or not, Muppets. This U.S. Senator has dedicated the power and public resources of his office to demonize popular creatures on Sesame Street, specifically Big Bird and lovable little Elmo. Ted rants he has proof that Muppets are covert tools of, quote, government propaganda. So this ridiculous excuse of a senator is saving America from Muppets. But for a whole bag of assorted nuttiness, you can't beat Senator Rick Scott's 11-point plan to rescue America. A disgraced former healthcare mogul, this mega millionaire reinvented himself as a wingnut Florida senator, and he now chairs a policy arm of the Republican Party. In February, he set forth a stunning agenda of far-out right-wing extremism that he says his party will push if they retake the Senate this November, including 1. Implementing new federal taxes on the poorest half of Americans. 2. Terminating Social Security and Medicare. 3. Completing Donald Trump's folly of a border wall. This is Jim Hightower saying, fiddle faddlers like Cruz and Scott have turned the once proud U.S. Senate into the little nut shop on the hill.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, glaring New York Times headline, factory jobs are booming like it's the 1970s. And the reality is this, as I've been saying, we moved away from manufacturing, we moved away from investments because of policy. Bad policy got us to the place where we are right now. Smart policy, good policy, can move us in the other direction. The one thing that the Republicans masterfully did is they got us working folk to look at our government with a jaundiced eye and to turn against our government. Government's bad. Well, you know what? Maybe we start thinking about government policy being something that helps us create jobs, create an economy that works for all of us. And here to share some thoughts on this most recent article and the direction of manufacturing, I've asked Mike Lux to come talk with us. Mike's the president of American Family Voices, their website, AmericanFamilyVoices.org. Mike, thanks for taking time for us.
I'm happy to come on, Rick. This is one of my favorite topics. This is such an important thing for America. I remember back in 2009 when the trade gaps were yawning and the financial crisis had hit, and Larry Summers, who was the chief economic advisor for Obama, was asked the question, what should Americans be selling to other economies around the world? And he said, legal services, accounting services, that kind of thing. He didn't even think about manufacturing, right? And now we've actually got a president who gives a damn about manufacturing and wants to see us creating more jobs. And we have barely started, barely scratched the surface, but we're already seeing the results.
Yeah, I would argue it's not even just so much about manufacturing. It's about workers. It's about people
Absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
those union workers that, like he talks about all the time, that throughout his career have made it possible for him to rise. It's about the working people. The jobs are a big part of that, but it's about making lives better. At least that's my view on it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, manufacturing is a part of that. We need to start making stuff again, like they do in Germany, which is a very high wage, high unionized economy. So people talk about, manufacturing should be done by low wage countries. It's, the time of manufacturing in America is over. I don't know if I can swear on your show or not, but
Don't.
but that ain't. I won't use the swear word, but that ain't true. You can have a high wage economy that still makes things, and you're absolutely right. We're talking about working people who make America go, make America run. Like nurses and fast food workers and teachers but also those factory workers and those construction workers.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we learned out of this pandemic, or at least I hope we learned, and I have been talking about all the years that I've been doing this program, domestic production, domestic consumption. In times of need, you produce what you need domestically, and you, in times of need, you ramp that production up. We didn't have that capacity because guess what? Our production was done overseas, and they were going, hey, ramp up production for us. And this is where I keep coming back to this. When things are good, it's okay, but in moments of crisis and moments of uneasiness, things get a little shaky. And I've always argued that manufacturing is a national security issue, especially when you're talking about high tech things like chips and machined goods and all of that. And I think we've lost that thought process.
Well, we absolutely have, and it's nice to see an administration that is refocusing on that. I loved Bill Clinton. I worked for Bill Clinton. I loved Obama. I worked in the transition for Obama. But they never have kept the focus on manufacturing. They were more concerned with other things. When the trade deals were being negotiated, they were being negotiated over stuff like intellectual property rights for companies, rather than what is it going to do for working people. And I think now you've got Biden, who's really reorienting things. He's really thinking about how do we build more things in America? How do we bring jobs back to America? And it's been a real focus of his from the very beginning. The very first bill that he passed had Buy America provisions in it, the strongest Buy America provisions we'd seen in decades. And you're starting to see that, and it's going to take a while. I mean, we dug ourselves a hell of a deep hole.
Yep.
I mean, for 40 years we've been digging a hole that workers keep getting thrown into, and so it's going to take a while to come back. But we're starting to see it. It's starting to happen, and we're also seeing, like worldwide, supply chains got so brittle, because these big corporations were these, multinational, and they make stuff. They make all of their chips in Taiwan, right? Like all of them. So what happens if there's a crisis? What happens if there's a tsunami? What happens if there's a pandemic? You can't make supply chains that brittle.
No, I agree.
So you gotta make stuff in America.
Now, I'm glad you brought up, the situation with President Obama and Clinton, because I think a big part of the anger that's out there is the fact that a lot of working people feel Democrats have left them behind. And part of what we're about to embark on the Working Class Heroes Tour is we're looking at going into areas that working people feel like they've been abandoned, and talk to them and admit, look, the Clinton years, the Obama years, they weren't talking to working class people. But in this moment, we got a president right now who, like I said today, his statement today was, I care about working class people and middle class people because they're the ones who get hurt the most. There's somebody who cares right now about working people.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And I mean, I think Clinton and Obama were both good about certain things on certain issues, but they really didn't get working class folks, and they didn't talk to them. They didn't spend time with them in the same kind of way we're seeing now. The Democratic Party drifted away from its base. The Democratic Party, from its beginning, has always been about working people. We were always supposed to be the party of workers. The party who fought the big finance guys on Wall Street, the party who fought the big banks, the party who looked out for workers, and we somewhere we lost sight of that, but I feel like now we're starting to get it back, and we're seeing the results. Manufacturing is coming back. Supply chains are being recreated here in America, and to see that start to happen is a really exciting thing.
In fact, the jobs that were lost during the pandemic are all back, and they've created an additional 67,000 manufacturing jobs. So we're well above pre-pandemic levels. And that's, again, I believe it comes back to the policies that to be honest, a number of them still haven't been fully enacted yet. So as we go further down this road, this snowball only grows bigger, bigger, and bigger.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, the bill that's been in place the longest was the Recovery Act, and the Recovery Act, we're starting to see the results of that, and that really invested in, for example, the Republicans like to talk about, funding the police. The Recovery Act actually funded the police, and it funded the firefighters, and it funded the first responders, and it funded teachers in schools, but it also gave cities the ability to start building things at the local level and doing local deals with small business, and that was passed a year and a half ago. But now the infrastructure bill got passed only a few months ago. We're just starting to see that spending, and that's going to produce not just road construction jobs, but that's going to produce manufacturing jobs.
Yep. And domestically, because of course in that we've got prevailing wage laws, we've got union language in there, and also this idea of buying American, domestic production, domestic consumption. You listen to the Rick Smith Show, where Mike Lux, president of American Family Voices. You can check out their website, AmericanFamilyVoices.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. And to that point, as this money goes out the door and we start seeing these projects, one of the things that Democrats do poorly, one of the things that Biden does poorly, and then I would argue Trump did masterfully, was take credit for things. Even things that he didn't do, still took credit for it. So it's my view, what we need to invest in are giant 15-foot Biden statues with pointing his finger, Biden did this. They have those idiotic stickers on gas pumps. Maybe we take that and we magnify it a gazillion times and go, yeah, this road you're driving on, hey, Joe Biden did this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Democrats have to do a better job of selling what they did, because what they accomplished in this last couple of years of Congress with Biden's leadership has been phenomenal. I mean, we took on pharma and beat them. Nobody's beaten pharma in 4 decades, 5 decades. I mean, we beat pharma, for Christ's sake, and drug prices are going to go down as a result. We took on the whole climate thing, and it wasn't a woo-woo environmental thing. That climate bill is going to create 6 million new jobs. And like you say, there's going to be, those jobs, a lot of those jobs, maybe even most of those jobs are going to be union jobs because of the way the bill was written, and it was done that way intentionally. It's the potential here is so great. This CHIPS Act, I mean, like industrial policy, like I remember my friends at the UAW talking about industrial policy back in the 80s. Right, that we ought to be thinking about being strategic about which industries we ought to have building in America, and it's starting to happen, you know. So I do think there's a long way to go. Like I said, that hole is pretty deep. But it's starting to happen. We're starting to see some change.
No, and that's a good thing. But my problem is we still have the corporate-controlled mainstream media that diminishes this stuff. While the headline glared, factory jobs are booming like it's the 70s, they went in, as you read the article, and diminished it. Oh, it's just craft breweries and ice cream makers. When the reality is we're talking about building battery plants for the electric vehicles of the future, solar panels. You got the investments that are being touted and rolled out haven't come online yet, but they're coming, and it's because of this administration.
That's exactly right. I have a friend in the solar industry, and the day that the bill passed, the Inflation Reduction Act passed, they announced a new factory in West Virginia, 3,000 jobs, and he said they're going to be expanding their workforce to build solar panels here in America. They've been shut out because China was doing it so cheaply. With the tax credits in that bill, we're going to be able to do that here in America. And you see that in industry after industry, in the electric car industry, in the chips industry, and all these different industries that we're going to see new jobs created in. It's really an exciting time, and it's exciting to see. I've been a Democrat my whole life, but Democrats have gotten a lot of stuff wrong. In these last 30, 40 years, we're starting to get things right. And we're starting to make those investments that are gonna pay off with jobs.
Yep, it's what we most certainly need. It's the smart policy, the smart investments, things like the Inflation Reduction Act that's going to help us build solar panels and electric vehicles and do all of those things to help address climate change. Again, that haven't come online yet. These are things that I fear, and this is where I kind of want to end this up, Mike. I kind of fear that we're at a crossroads. While there are smart policies in place, while we're moving in a direction that I think is going to help us move back to that golden era of the American working class that had strong government investment and strong unionization for workers to share in the labor, in the wealth that their labor creates, one election can rip all that away because Republicans are running around going, hey, we take power, we're gutting all this stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and it is scary. What they're talking about is scary, and it's not. I'm scared about the state of our democracy. I'm scared about voting rights. I'm scared about all those things, but I'm also scared about these economic policies because we're finally getting on the right track. We're finally investing in working people after a long drought, and to see that ripped away. They say, oh, we want to repeal, the Inflation Reduction Act. They want to repeal the bill that's going to create 6 million new jobs, right? I mean, they want to repeal the bill that's going to lower drug prices. I mean, that's to go backward. Would be such a terrible thing.
No, well, these are the people, Mike, who ran out. We're going to repeal the Affordable Care Act and take insurance away from people who for years and decades never had it before. This is not new to them, Mike. Not new. This is why I'm hoping voters go to the polls in November and make sure that we don't go backwards. But Mike, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. I hope you'll come back and share some more thoughts, especially as we embark on our Working Class Heroes tour here in the month of October.
Rick, I'm so excited about that Working Class Heroes tour. It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to hearing the stories and seeing where you go and seeing what kinds of stuff you do while you're on the road. It'll be fun to watch.
Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate the time. Good stuff. Mike Lux, president of the American Family Voices Group, AmericanFamilyVoices.org, the website. You can check out the work that they do there. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break, right back with your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show for working people of the day. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2007. It was that morning that a bridge under construction in Vietnam collapsed. The disaster happened in Kinh Tao, about 100 miles south of Ho Chi Minh City. It was a suspension bridge project to cross the Hao River. The project was run by Japanese firms working with the Vietnamese government. 250 workers were on site at the project when the disaster happened. 55 people were killed and another 100 were injured due to the collapse. One reason cited for the collapse was that torrential downpours had caused the support structure for the bridge to sink. Another possible reason was that the scaffolding on the construction project was too weak to hold the weight. When it failed, it took down a section of the 4-lane concrete deck approach ramp with it. The fallen section weighed between 1,500 and 2,000 tons. The collapse was considered the worst disaster in the history of the Vietnamese construction industry. Man Hung, leader of one of the construction teams, described what occurred, saying, quote, "We suddenly heard a great explosion at a bridgehead. Dust covered a great airspace while workers screamed out. The scene was so terrible, the whole great block fell on people below. Vietnamese, along with Japanese and Filipino rescue volunteers, rushed to attempt to find survivors. 1,000 local residents gave blood at the hospital for those injured. The rescue efforts were hampered by the danger of a further collapse. They had to use a crane to clear the rubble. Finally, after 4 torturous days, the rescue efforts were called off. The bridge project was completed in 2010. The names of the fallen workers are inscribed on a memorial.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Got an email during the break from Bill. Bill says, I have a suggestion for a collapsed economy to include in your tour. He suggests Rockford, Illinois. He says it was a thriving economy before Ronald Reagan's term of office ended. He said that was the location for the high-end experimental mechanical engineering for NASA and the military. He said it all collapsed after Ronald Reagan left office. It was because Ronald Reagan cut the budget for NASA and many other programs which Rockford depended on to budget his Star Wars agenda. He said the city has never recovered. It is a faint shadow of what it used to be. And sadly, again, I keep coming back to this basic premise. Smart investment, sound policy. This is the stuff that built the most prosperous working class in history. This is what built that iconic era. And for so long, working people have gotten used to not getting the things that we need. That, well, the focus has gone on other things. And there have been a number of books written on this, to where this is not news. To what's the matter with Kansas, bowling alone. There's been a bunch of this stuff where people go, look, I'm not getting the economic stuff that I need. What are my next series of interests? And they've fed us the social stuff. They've force fed us the outrage. Where the outrage should really be is that people are working longer and harder for less. Less opportunities, less health care, less retirement security. We're heading towards a retirement security tsunami at some point in the very near future. My generation kind of screwed, because there's no defined benefit pension for most working people at the end of their work careers. There is, this 401k defined contribution thing that you couldn't afford to put money in. Well, so sorry.
This is where we've got to start talking about smart policies that, again, that's going to help working people. And I go back to, this administration doing some of that. The fact that during the Reagan era we saw massive shifts in budgeting that picked winners and losers. Rockford sadly was one of the losers, and had done nothing really to help. And I'm sorry to hear that, Bill. It's tragic. And I expect as we go out on the road and as we go into communities across the states that we're heading to, we're going to hear that story replicated time and time again. While the addresses may be different, the stories are going to be the same. The pride of what once was. That pride that we used to be this manufacturing center. This used to be the identity of the community. And then it was ripped away. Now, the narrative has been for so long, it was the unions. They got greedy. Those workers wanted too much. It's their fault. Blame the victims. Because it's what corporate America does very well. When the reality is it's been these folks at the top who just want more. And they chased around the globe the most exploitable labor, the most exploitable environmental regulations that they could get so that they could profit. And we've got to have that conversation and write the narrative. Because for too long, the right has been getting away with it's those greedy workers who want too much. And understand, when this recession hits, and it's going to, when the Fed gets its wish, and we suppress wages, they're going to blame working people for it, already doing it. This is where we collectively have to stand together and say, no, we're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to put up with it. We're not going to let it happen. Not again. This isn't difficult. If we could just put down our divisions. If we could focus on the things that unite us as opposed to what tears us apart. And for me, it's always been the economy. You go back to James Carville's, it's the economy, stupid. It's always, how can I make sure that my kids get what they need? How can I make sure that there's a roof over their head and food in front of them on the dinner table? That's our focus as working people. But what the right's masterfully done is, they've created this environment where, don't worry about that. Let's talk about this stuff over here that doesn't affect your life at all. Who loves who does what with their body. Somehow that's the focus of our entire politics. Whereas I'm saying, what brought us together as a country was the fact that we shared in the wealth and the opportunity. And for so many, the struggle, the anger of the struggle, the lives that they were told were possible, that they were going to be able to lead, for many hasn't happened. And then the distrust of the elites and the need to be well educated, which is why Donald Trump loves to say, love the poorly educated. Because they're distrustful of the elites, because look what they sold us. If we give the wealthy everything they could possibly want, they'll take care of us. They're benevolent. They're good. When the reality is they're smart. They know what to do with money. That's make more for themselves. At your expense. So for me, this election, pretty simple. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@ricksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Never miss a moment. Share with your friends, coworkers, especially people that you might not agree with. Good stuff. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, ours will be there. Simple.
It's time for an intervention. We need to hold fossil fuel companies and their enablers to account.
UN Secretary General calls for fossil fuel industry to pay for climate damages.
I just want to say one word to you. This plastics.
New initiative takes on plastics and the petrochemical industry. Plus,
If we want to beat China, pass the Kigali Treaty.
U.S. Senate approves the first